Hi everyone, I'm continuing the troubleshooting on my 1974 DT250, and we've identified that the source of the problem is a spark. We get a nice bright blue spark when you're kickstarting it, but not when you're turning over at any significant RPMs. Fast. I can hook a drill up to this and the spark goes away. So we're trying to figure out why that is. A couple of culprits right now are perhaps a bad source coil or a bad ground somewhere in the system. So what I'm going to do right now is test this source coil. But just a very quick overview of the electrical system because it's not terribly complex. So on this DT250, you've got a couple of different coils here. And the coil on the left is what's called the source coil. So that's what generates the spark that will fire the spark plug. The other one is your lighting coil. So it generates the voltage for your indicator lights, your headlight, things like that. You don't need this. You don't need the lighting coil at all for this thing to run. So literally the only thing we're worrying about in troubleshooting this is the source coil itself. So the source coil is actually very simple in principle. It's a bunch of laminated copper wire that is going around these laminated iron cores. So one end of this copper wire grounds against the stator plate, and then it wraps all the way around, and the other end of that wire is what ultimately comes out of the black wire on your harness. So the black wire from your harness literally leads to the other end of this thing. Now your points will your points function to ground that out against the stator, and then the moment your points start to open, it breaks the ground from this source coil, and it allows the spark to come through the black wire. And from the black wire, it'll then go to your secondary coil right here, and then it steps the voltage way up so that it can fire your spark plug. So what we're going to do is test the resistance of this source coil right here and make sure that it's within spec. I've got the factory service manual up on the computer right now, so you can see the ignition primary resistance. It's highlighted, but it should be just over 1 ohm, 1.02 ohms with plus or minus 10%. So that's what we're going to look for. I'm going to hand the camera to my lovely daughter Zoe. All right, Zoe, let's do this. So to measure this, it's really simple. Again, I have my points completely unhooked, and there's no condenser in this system. So at this point, the black wire is leading straight to the source coil. So I'm putting one end of my ohm meter there, and that's going to lead into the outbound lead of this source coil. And now if I just ground out this other lead, I should get a reading. And I get 2.4 ohms. So that's it's more than double the resistance that I should have, and yeah, it's continuing to go up just a little bit. So well outside of the bounds of what is within spec for this bike. So that leads into what some have theorized. Some people commented on my timing bulb, how big the difference was between the brightness levels of that, and they predicted a higher level of resistance in the coil itself. Now, I don't think this is a grounding issue. And the reason I don't think this is a grounding issue is because the ground from my motor to the frame doesn't even come into play here. What I'm actually going, my full loop is this black wire, and this is a deep remanufactured stator, so it comes back looking as new as it did from the Yamaha factory. So the stator plate is completely clean, and I cleaned off the joints to my motor as well. So I'm holding pretty solid at 2.4, 2.5 ohms on this. So clearly my source coil is out of sorts. I'm now going to go ahead and put the flywheel magneto back on this. I'm going to spin it and see what kind of AC voltage we can get just raw coming out of here, but we'll stop it for now. So I have the flywheel magneto bolted back on, and the points, again, the points are out of this system. There are no points, and there is no condenser. So what I'm essentially testing is to see if the source coil produces an increasing number of volts as the RPMs increase, because what I've got is spark that cuts out once the RPMs increase. So I've got my voltage meter here, and with the positive lead, I'm going straight into the black wire coming out of the magneto. That black wire obviously leads into one side of the source coil. Other side of the source coil goes to ground, so I'm grounded out there. And now we're going to give this thing a spin with a drill that's hooked up to this. And I will say that before I do any of these types of tests, I pour a little bit of 2-stroke oil in the upper cylinder. So I'm not just doing these dry. Rest assured there is fresh oil in my top end. But let's go ahead and give this a low speed spin. So we're seeing 1.5 volts at low speeds. 2.5, 3, 4, 5. We max out at about 6.7 volts AC current on this. Now, the bad thing is, I don't know what that means, and obviously there's nothing in the manual, in the service manual, that tells you what types of voltage a source coil would get. What I find interesting about this is that the voltage certainly doesn't taper off once I hit those high speeds. But who knows, maybe those voltages are way out of spec. I'm hoping that someone on the forums might have a little bit of an idea of how much a source coil on one of these bikes should put out. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks, guys.